Okay, let's dive right into this. We are traveling back to a moment in sports history that is, honestly, almost impossible to comprehend by today's standards. When I first started digging into the 1950 FIFA World Cup, I quickly realized that calling this just a soccer tournament is a massive understatement. This was a colossal, high-stakes global gamble that culminated in an event so shocking it literally changed the cultural fabric of an entire nation. So it begs a pretty fascinating question. What actually happens when a $290 million sports spectacle ends in an absolute national tragedy? Well, that's the exact scenario we're breaking down today. We're going to look at how a tournament designed to showcase a modern, triumphant nation instead delivered a devastating blow that people are still talking about decades later. Section 1, Resurrecting the World Cup. To really grasp the sheer pressure of this event, you've got to remember that back then, much of Europe lay in absolute ruins. Coming out of World War II, the World Cup was at serious risk of never happening again. International governments felt their very scarce resources absolutely needed to be spent on rebuilding cities, not on sports. I mean, there was a massive 12-year gap since the 1938 tournament in France because the 1942 and 1946 games were entirely canceled by the war. It wasn't until the 1946 FIFA Congress that Brazil boldly stepped up to act as the savior of the tournament, offering to host it as long as it was pushed to 1950.
Section 2, a chaotic qualification process.
Having a host country was one thing, right? But actually getting teams to travel to South America at the dawn of the Cold War? Total logistical nightmare. The defending two-time champions, Italy, were persuaded to attend, but their legendary squad had been absolutely devastated by the Superga air disaster, a tragic plane crash the year prior that wiped out their top players. Out of grief and fear, the remaining Italian team refused to fly and actually traveled all the way to Brazil by boat. Meanwhile, nations behind the Iron Curtain, like the Soviet Union and Hungary, flat out refused to participate. India also withdrew. Now, there's this famous myth that they quit because FIFA banned them from playing barefoot, which, by the way, they had done at the 1948 Olympics. But the Indian captain actually clarified it was due to travel costs, lack of practice time, and the fact that they just valued the Olympics more than the World Cup. Add in withdrawals from Scotland, Turkey, and France over travel logistics, and FIFA was left frantically scrambling.
The result of all those massive withdrawals? An incredibly unbalanced tournament. Only 13 teams actually showed up to play in the whole thing. Group 4 was completely decimated. Because of all the dropouts, that group was left with just 2 teams, Uruguay and Bolivia. Think about that for a second. It was an incredibly fractured, wild bracket, but, well, the show had to go on. Section 3, a unique tournament format. You see, Brazil wasn't just throwing a tournament here. They were making a massive financial gamble to show the world they were a highly modernized country. $275 million. That is the estimated modern equivalent of what they spent just to build the Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro alone. Their total investment was around $290 million. And because they had spent an absolute fortune on infrastructure, the Brazilian organizers demanded a guaranteed massive return on their investment. To ensure that return, Brazil demanded a totally unique tournament format. Instead of a traditional straight knockout tournament, which would have only guaranteed 16 games, Brazil's forced a format featuring first-round groups, followed by a final round-robin group of the top 4 teams. This guaranteed 30 total matches, which meant way more ticket revenue for the host nation. FIFA actually resisted this at first, but Brazil threatened to back out of hosting entirely. The ultimate irony here is that by insisting on this round-robin format with absolutely no knockout final, Brazil inadvertently set the stage for the most dramatic, high-stakes climax imaginable.
Section 4, Early Tournament Shocks.
If the organizers thought this was going to be a predictable march to victory for the favorites, well, they were dead wrong. The group stages left global audiences utterly stunned. The United States defeated England 1-0. Keep in mind, England had recently beaten a rest of Europe team 6-1 in an exhibition and came in as massive tournament favorites making their debut. Instead, they were shockingly sent packing in the very first round by the U.S. team. I literally couldn't believe this when I read it. It's still considered one of the biggest David versus Goliath upsets in international sports history. And the shocks absolutely didn't stop there. Sweden defeated Italy 3-2. This meant the two-time defending champions, Italy, were eliminated in the first round for the very first time in history. The sheer chaos of these group stages whittled the final round-robin group down to just 4 teams: Brazil, Spain, Sweden, and Uruguay.
Section 5, the Maracanazo upset.
So the final round-robin matches are playing out, and everything comes down to the absolute final scheduled game on July 16th, 1950. A true clash of titans. On one side, you have Brazil. They were an unstoppable juggernaut. They'd scored only 3 goals in the tournament, conceding only 4. They absolutely thrashed Sweden 7-1 and routed Spain 6-1. And because of the point system, Brazil only needed a single draw in this final match to be crowned world champions. On the other side, you have Uruguay. They had quietly survived to make it to this final match and absolutely had to win to take the trophy. But, crucially, Uruguay was not intimidated. They were used to the big South American stadiums and had actually beaten Brazil just a few months prior in a fierce regional tournament, the Copa Rio Branco.
But honestly, nothing could prepare Uruguay for this. 199,954. That is the official, literally suffocating record crowd size that packed into the newly built Maracanã Stadium that day. Almost 200,000 people, overwhelmingly Brazilian, waiting to coronate their national heroes. The tension in that building was just unimaginable.
Let's trace exactly how this catastrophe unfolded on the pitch. Just after halftime, in the 47th minute, Brazil's Friaça scores, putting the hosts up 1-0. The stadium erupts. It seems absolutely inevitable. But then, Uruguay fights back. In the 66th minute, Uruguay equalizes. The crowd grows incredibly tense. Remember, a tie still means Brazil wins the whole thing. But then, with just 11 minutes left on the clock, in the 79th minute, Uruguay's Alcides Gidea squeaks a goal past the Brazilian goalkeeper, 2-1. And that's exactly how it ended. Uruguay was crowned World Cup champions. The stadium of nearly 200,000 people didn't boo. They were just plunged into absolute, deafening, traumatized silence.
Section 6. The Tragic Legacy. This wasn't just a lost game. It was a profound cultural shock. I learned that the match instantly earned a name that's still used today, the Maracanazo, which translates to the Maracanã blow. The hubris of the massive $290 million Brazilian spectacle, the purpose-built stadium, the record-breaking crowd, all of it ended in an upset so massive it became a permanent cultural scar. The nation was totally traumatized.
But, the most devastating legacy of this whole tournament is what happened to Moaguir Barbosa, the Brazilian goalkeeper who let that final shot slip past him. He was unfairly scapegoated by the entire nation for the rest of his life. Shortly before his death in the year 2000, he gave this absolutely heartbreaking quote: "The maximum punishment in Brazil is 30 years imprisonment, but I have been paying for something I am not even responsible for by now for 50 years. Let those words sink in for a second. It really grounds this massive historical event in very visceral human empathy. Which brings us to the future of the sport. We've seen how the 1950 World Cup transformed a game into a national tragedy and cemented legacies that lasted a lifetime. As we look ahead, one really has to wonder, will the 2026 World Cup final deliver anywhere near this level of unscripted, breathtaking drama? Only time will tell. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep exploring the incredible histories hidden inside the sports we love.